On December the 5th, 1959, the expedition Pegasus Overland set out from England. The expedition consisted of 2 Land Rovers and 8 men. The leader was Stephen Fox, a trainee manager from the Wirral. Peter Finn, telephonic engineer of Liverpool. Lawrence Lalouette, window cleaner and engineer of Manchester. Ian Tompkins, engineer also of Manchester. John Nelson, a coal miner of Salford. Ronnie Fenton, a toolmaker and expedition comedian from Manchester. John Devine, a shipwright from Liverpool. And Barry Brewster, a doctor of Trinity College, Dublin. After 18 months of money saving and preparation, these 8 members of the 12th and 13th Battalion of the Parachute Regiment set out on their journey from Lydd Airport, flying across the Channel to Le Touquet.
On only our second day, we had to call a halt and severely reduce our load weight because the vehicles were proving unmanageable even on these good roads. Most of the jettisoned load we gave to André, the Belgian farmer on whose ground we were camping. We hurried on through Brussels and into Switzerland, for even now we were conscious of our race against the snows of high eastern Turkey. The St. Gothard Pass was blocked by snow, and we had to use the train ferry. In one village we witnessed an extraordinary car crash, in which the car cannoned from side to side of the road and finally fetched up against a wall, plunged through it and ran down a bank. We were able to help by winching the car back onto the road. Having shot through Italy in a day, we motored along the national youth-built autoputs of Yugoslavia. These are fast, well-surveyed roads. Bullock carts and night driving do not mix, and we usually manage to avoid both. Approaching the Iron Curtain of Bulgaria, the road deteriorated sharply, and more for novelty than necessity, we used four-wheel drive. Little did we guess then that four-wheel drive and change would soon be of little avail. We made camp for our 5th night just on the western side of the Iron Curtain, and here met some odd people. Ian had quite a chat with this fellow to say he didn't speak a word of Slav. Already a routine was setting into our camp stops, each man having his own job to do. We even had our late riser, always Ronnie, the comedian, with Stephen Fox doing the ejecting. So we rolled up to the Bulgarian border, which was much like any other, and as easily crossed. Our first red village, very similar to those we had passed through in Yugoslavia. The people were always fascinated by our vehicles. Sofia itself, however, was rather different and very policified, and I did not use the cine camera outside the vehicle. We were permitted only 24 hours to get through Bulgaria, but this suited our haste. In this Turkish village, transport arrangements tended to be somewhat primitive. And the dress of the women left a good deal to the imagination. The local market was a scene of great colour and clatter. Instance this rather sinister-looking salesman standing behind his Harry Lime-type ampoules. Istanbul and its minarets, said by Ronnie to be the Cape Canaveral of Turkey. The ferry across the Bosphorus and the beer of Istanbul are expensive items, so that we did not stay long. Pete Finn, as treasurer, always had the unpleasant jobs. Apprehension was mounting as we rushed at Ankara. We seemed so near now. In fact, the journey between Istanbul and Ankara held for us one twisted rear wheel bearing, a broken clutch, and a disastrously wrong road. To reach Tehran by Christmas Day seemed impossible, but we would try. Larry eventually led us unwilling into the mountains, and we made our first snow camp. The freezing metal tent poles stuck to our hands, and our sleeping bags were soon wet and cold. The temperature was really abominable. Cold, ice, snow, and wind, and invisible roads made the journey a treacherous one. It was at this stage that morale seemed in direct proportion to temperature. We discovered later that the inverse of this is true in the deserts. I was reciting Gunga Din to Larry, and as I reached the words slimy and it stunk, the Land Rover slithered through the snow into some rocks. Shovel and crowbar working, we managed to turn the other vehicle round so that we could use the winch. Two hours later, we were clear, but with a severed hydraulic brake pipe. As brakes made little difference anyway, and temperature and time were such that progression was paramount, we moved on a few kilometers to our night camp. In fact, from dawn to dusk that day, we had made just 40 miles. We could hardly credit the change 2 days later. We were parched and hot, and one of our engines went on fire. I believe the army have a phrase concerning miles and miles of nothing to turn round in, and this was our first impression of Persia. We found Tabriz, however, and it was now Christmas Eve. This was our Christmas Day, having driven the Tabriz mountain range throughout the night of Christmas Eve. In a sandstorm, we discovered you do two things quickly: lose your way and get sick of sand. There are 900 miles of desert track hereabouts and 3 trees. Now there are 2. Because of the sand stream which the vehicles made, we were travelling at a 1-mile interval, and as this vehicle was in rear at the time, we had, as Larry put it, rather lost our paddle. However, this huge tanker gave us one sharp heave and almost pulled the vehicle in half. The crowbar did the rest. We had been told that we would not get through to Tehran in late December because of the snows in high eastern Turkey. That we had done so pleased us, but particularly so because we arrived into Tehran on Christmas Day, as planned. Ian found Ferdowsi Square, the hub of Tehran, and the sort of place I was permitted to film. There were others more interesting, but less decorative. At the embassy, we were generously given 3 essentials to complete our Christmas Day: a bath, turkey, and beer. We established our camp in a luxurious but disused compound at a garage, the proprietor of which not only consented to our camping, but brought along vodka and caviar for Christmas. After some delays, we drove south towards Isfahan, leaving Tehran the day before 3 men were publicly hanged there. We were again in miles and miles of nothing. Some say that Isfahan is half the world. It is certainly wonderful, but Ronnie said he still preferred the other half. Whilst the others took tea with the Bishop of Isfahan, I had my leg set and put in plaster by Dr. Peter Wilde. The taxi had run over my foot as I was filming. Having driven the desert all day, we found a crystal clear stream, and the others all had a wonderful swim. I was not smiling. You can imagine that to fall asleep at the wheel is easily done in these conditions, and this is just what this unfortunate fellow had done. The huge tanker seemed to be in the most extraordinary bits, but the driver, miles from nowhere, seemed quite unperturbed and had simply gone to sleep again. We left him a bottle of beer and some water and moved on. So, back to driving on the left-hand side. At Quetta, we watched a military parade celebrating the Armed Forces Day. Everything about them, even the pipe tunes, were still very British. These worthy gentlemen were to take the salute. This is where we lived for 6 days downtown in Quetta. Letters home, sleep and reading occupied a fair portion of the day. This particular gentleman would sell you anything at all. I feel sure that grandmothers would be included in his list. Stephen Fox bargaining for some sheets with which to renew our safari beds. We left Quetta and motored to Lahore, where a man stopped us and asked us if we were lost. He turned out to be the Commissioner of Police in Lahore, and we later met his 14-year-old daughter, who entertained us playing the sitar. Having crossed the uncomfortable border of Pakistan and India, we landed in Delhi just in time for the Republic Day celebrations. Again, we found the military tone very British. The late President Nehru was in attendance. Each set of dancers represent a different state. From Delhi, inevitably to Agra and the Taj Mahal. Shah Jahan, for his love of the Mumtaj, built this great symbol. 22,000 men and 22 years it took to build the Taj. Once completed, the architect's hands were cut off, that he might never build another as beautiful. Outside, the locals, ever after the odd rupee, drew Stephen Fox's attention long enough to claim their reward. We had failed to get permission to enter Burma despite all our efforts, and so were compelled to take to the seas at Calcutta. We loaded the vehicles on the forward deck of the Camphor and eventually sailed down the Hooghly River, leaving the melee of Calcutta behind us. The Hooghly River runs south from Calcutta to the ocean, and any of our group will tell you supports a vast population of the most vicious mosquitoes. This was a time to relax and write and consider our problems. The Camphor was to take us around the Malaysian peninsula to Bangkok. We would then drive south to Singapore and sail later to northwestern Australia. Bangkok is situated on the river Chao Phraya, and the floating river population and the pointed roofs of the temples are the first signs of the city. The waterways are an important mode of transport about the city and provide a playground for children and disease. The Temple of Dawn is extraordinary and fantastic and beyond description. We spent a day at the Pasteur snake farm and watched fascinated whilst these two men climbed calmly into the pit, lifted the pots and deftly caught the snakes so that they might extract the venom from their glands. This would then be made into anti-snakebite serum by the process of active immunization. Once the venom had been extracted by the syringe, the snakes are thrown into the water around the pit, from which they seem disinclined to move. Beyond the immediate city area, with its many temples, can be seen the jungle through which we were now to travel. The iron ore there has such a high yield that it all goes for smelting, and the islands are in fact being slowly dug out of the sea. We left the northwest and motored the many hundreds of miles heading southwest for Perth, where I had been working in Fremantle Hospital. The outback is enormous and its solitude frightening. The journey from Derby to Perth took 6 hard